Hey everybody, this is another video on programming with Ballerina. So I'm just working my way through all these, um, Ballerina by example pieces. Now this one I just want to talk about really quickly. This is really neat. Ballerina has, basically you can use comments and write them in a way that it'll literally build out your documentation for you. So if you comment your code really well, you'll be able to use Dockerina, which is a tool that Ballerina provides. It'll read through your code, take your comments, and generate documentation for you, which isn't that is very cool. Makes documentation easy, makes your code more well documented. That is cool. Okay, I'm not going to get into sort of basically it's a pound sign as a comment, but there's some extra syntax for how you denote your comments. I'll let you read that at your own leisure, but making you aware of that feature. Now I'm just going to go through more functions. So function pointers. So let's take a look at how this works. Okay, that allows you to use functions as variable arguments to functions. So let's see here. Let's pass the code in. How do we denote pointers? And if you're not familiar with what pointers do, pointers usually point to a place where information is stored in a computer's memory. So that way you can have access to things in places you normally wouldn't have access to, like in a function. Let's see, Control V. Let's follow this code carefully. So we're bringing in this. We're bringing in this from this library here. Not sure what that's for, but we'll come back to that. Function test string x returns. It brings either an integer or an error. That's neat. So you can put like an or for what it returns. Y equals int from strings. Okay, again, int is this library that's being brought in. Okay, float 0, 0. If y is an integer for each item in x, and x is coming from the list of integers you're passing in. Panic y. That's interesting. I'd like to know what that panic keyword does. Return f. Okay. Just trying to see where are we passing in a function. Okay, here we are trying to see it. Okay, int x is our first parameter, so an integer, and then you're also passing in a function with this signature. So it has to have that signature, which is what this does. Returns float bar. Well, that's the name of the function. Okay, so this is essentially what you're doing is you have to literally type the functions entirely. So the function has to have the same parameters and same return value. That's in the typing. So this is the type, and then this is the parameter. Okay, so cool. You're saying, hey, you can pass in a function that takes in a string and a list of integers, or a variable number of integers, that also then returns a float, and this function will be assigned to the variable bar. That's what that's saying. Okay, that's an interesting syntax for that. Okay, I'm trying to think if I've seen, yeah, I'll have to kind of scratch my head around that one. I can see what it does. Again, you're just basically putting in the whole signature of the function right there. Okay, and then this one says function get function pointer returns the signature of the function. So you're saying return a function with a signature. It's going to return test. Okay, that's fine. So you can define. So essentially, you just use the signature of the function as how you type the function in places where you'd have to put in a type. So that's cool. And I guess because this is so many words, you wrap this in parentheses next to returns. Okay. Aside from that, do I see anything else worth pointing out? The only other thing that I found interesting was this, where you're able to do a conditional type. That's neat, because at least the way I'm understanding that means integer or error. So that's pretty cool. Otherwise, this all looks. We don't know what this panic keyword does. I'm sure we'll learn that along the way. So that's something to look forward to. But yeah, so you can pass functions into other functions, and functions can return functions, which is not something new in language, but again, this shows you how to type it. Okay. Cool. So let's go back. Anonymous function. So this is like arrow functions in a lot of languages. It's just basically writing a function without a name. So let's see how we would do that. Let me just copy the code. I always just find it easier to read it in VS Code. Okay, so let's see here. Return string anonymous function. Yeah, and it's just you're just basically creating a variable that holds a string. Return string a non-function. Function string. Okay, and okay, all you're doing is just assigning a function to a variable. So basically, you just use the same function syntax. You just don't put a namespace in there. You just assign it to a variable. So you see, it's just saying, and then you have to type the variable that holds it the same as the return value. It looks like, because this function returns a string, and the variable it's being stored in return is supposed to hold the string. So it's a string function. That's okay. That's fine. Otherwise, it's just printing some stuff out. This is another for each loop. I get it. It's for thing and thing. Or for each thing and thing. Oh, and here's an arrow function. Okay, cool. So let's take a look how the syntax for that. That syntax is the same as we're used to in JavaScript. Okay, so if you want to do an arrow expression, you can do that. So string arrow expression equals that. That's good. Okay, so that's the bottom line. It's basically you can do an anonymous function two ways. You can use the function keyword. So that's what they did here. Okay, so string a non-function equals this function, or you can do it this way. Okay, using a arrow function. Okay, where we just basically saying this variable arrow expression equals this function that takes an x, y, and returns x plus y, which I think then that would imply that these parameters must be strings, I am assuming, or just bottom line, you can just take in whatever parameters. Oh wait, here we go, function string, return string. Let me think about this. Return string, arrow expression. That's an interesting syntax for that, because actually technically you're putting the function signature here. That's why x and y is a string, and returns a string. So you're putting the function signature, then the variable name, and then you're making it equal an arrow expression. Okie dokie. That's another way of defining a function. That seems more complicated than I would like arrow functions to be, because in JavaScript they're so nice and simple, but that is a thing. So again, it's just the function signature, name of the variable you want to store it in, and then it equals an arrow expression in the same way that it would work in JavaScript. Cool. Which just means parameters expression. So this is going to return based on the parameters that are passed in. So yeah, that seems to be all that's we need to get from there. Closures. I'm going to hold off on that because that's, I mean, I know how closures work, and I'm sure it works the same way here. Like, I'm sure all it just means is just being able to return a function. Let's see here, returns. Yep, there's a returns a function, and then that function is going to have access to the variables inside its parent function. So that's all that should be referring to. Okay, the main function. The public function named main is considered as the entry point to Ballerina program. This data binding can have 0 or more parameters whose types are subtypes of any data, including any number of required default and or single rest parameter. The main function could also return a value whose subtype is of error. So basically saying, hey, we can pass some function main. We can pass all sorts of stuff into here. You can see they passed in all these sort of parameters. Now to run the sample, execute Ballerina command, use the Ballerina command to invoke this main function, specifying Alice as the string argument for name. So here we go. So you can put arguments after the command, so that's good to know. Okay, and here's like named arguments. So Ballerina run the main function, Alice 20, name Alice age 20, year freshman. Okay, so let's see here. I mean, I can assume that's going to be useful for like port numbers and other things we might want to specify later when we start working with network stuff. But yeah, it's just the main function, meaning it's the function where you do all the stuff. You can give it as many arguments as you want, and then those arguments can be specified when you run the script in your command line. So that's straightforward. And how am I doing on time? Actually, this is a good time to wrap up this one. I'll see you guys in the next video. Ciao.